Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the artist talk for Andrew Fallat's Jackstraw New Media Gallery installation Timbre. We're really pleased to have you all here. Pretty good crowd for a Friday night Zoom artist talk, so thanks. Thanks for joining us. It's lovely to be here. My name is Levi Fuller. I work at Jackstraw Cultural Center, and I manage the artist residency programs. One of those is the New Media Gallery program. I would like to mention we're actually currently accepting applications for the 2022 residency programs, which includes the 2022 to 2023 New Media Gallery program, as well as the artist support and writers programs. So you can go to jackstraw.org to find out more about that. I would, of course, like to thank our funders, the City of Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, For Culture King County Lodging Tax Fund, Washington State Arts Commission, Arts Fund, Rainier Foundation, and individual contributors. Thank you, all of you, whatever size your gifts are, we really appreciate them. So yeah, it's been a pleasure to have Andy's installation here in the gallery. I hope you can check it out. If you haven't gotten to see it in person yet, you can call 206-634-0919 or email jsp@jackstraw.org to set up an appointment to visit. And I think we've got another 2 weeks, so plenty of time to come check it out. With all that said, I will hand it over to Andrew Fallat.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me. It's really exceptional. I'll start off by sharing my PowerPoint. Can everybody see that? Wonderful. So thanks for having me to present this work. The support that Jackstraw has provided has been a real treat. Between this talk, the podcast that's coming up next week, and the pleasure of doing a workshop towards the end has given me a lot to be grateful for. So the way I envision this talk going is I'm going to introduce the work in the gallery, and then I'm going to talk about my process in general through a small trip back through time to the relevant work that I've made. Give some insight to my practice, and then some art that was with me through the praxis of this work. And then there will be a video that Joel put together with Greg Sinibaldi, performing and experimenting with the sculptures. So let's get rolling. So here is the gallery, if you haven't seen it. That's during install, just to give you an idea. No sounds, just the space. And so it starts off with this matrix mixer that is sort of how you select an input and an output. So an input could be a microphone, a keyboard, a auxiliary input, and then it goes to either the harp, the speaker, the sheet. All of those are just kind of names I guessed with as I was looking at them. Let's see. On the right is a sheet of steel. I'm calling this piece sheet. It's a little thicker than 2 sheets of paper, and there's a speaker with its voice coil, the part of the speaker that moves the paper cone, and a nice little piece I soldered together to the sheet. It's suspended from the same hardware holding it in place. And the sheet has some nice rust modeling on it, and it's situated where you can sort of envelop the viewer. You really need to get close to this piece because most of the sound is inside the sheet. Hopefully I can try and draw that out with contact microphones. For just being a sheet hung up, it has a surprising, like kind of mopey character for just a big sheet of steel, and it's kind of based on an idea of a plate reverb, which is used a lot in sound recording to get the really lush, like huge hallway sound of in recordings. You have guitar heavy rock has that kind of like really big reverb, and that's essentially what a plate reverb does. It gives it a lot of room to sort of spread out and vibrate, and this one can sort of move throughout the space as well as the sound that goes through it. The second work is a prepared speaker that is a series of raised and turned and fabricated metal elements connected to voice coils that are exposed on the top. There's another picture of it. On the right is a bell that was hand hammered out of brass and is struck by an elaborate little striker that bounces with the coil. On the left is a copper hollow form that jingles its tassels in the smallest speaker. And the middle one is mostly a muffler. It's got a little wooden turning, which you can barely see through the tassels on the copper piece. It just kind of like visualizes all the sort of kinetic motion that's going on. When you look into the turned hollow steel part that's sort of muffling that speaker, you get this really delightful visual of any time that little ball moves around. It sort of fish eyes and either like fills up that little picture plane that's created, or bounces around in a really unique, interesting way. The bell on the right can be kind of aggressive when it rings. It's kind of buzzy. It's almost like an alarm if it's not set right. Other times it gets this nice chirp, or this like little catch to the sound, which is really nice. And this sculpture I'm calling a harp, more as a descriptor than a title. And I was wanting to make a form that seemed as if it was resisting gravity, or in the act of being inflated. What happens to the string instrument in the act of being blown up? It's kind of a ironic twist I was thinking of. And does it shape and form the sound or our impression of it? Does the acceleration of our eye to the ground, because of the form, elicit the pace of the sounds that could come from it? Can these objects exist as a script or a composition for those that are performing with it? Does the visual language and the formal concern augment a viewer the same way if the viewer is a performer, someone that's actively engaged with it? And that was a lot of what I was thinking about, was how to bring sound as an element of visual language, embodying objects and thinking about what's the potential for that relationship. The way the sculpture works is that there's 9 nylon strings that run down the 2 faces made from an Alaskan cedar, soundboard braced with native fir. The body is made from a red elm that was felled somewhere on UW's campus. I got it as waste lumber from the slab mill behind where I work, and milled it up into a bunch of strips that you'll see later. The strings knit through a bridge that has a pretty decent sized surface transducer. You can see that silver cylinder right below the wooden part resting on those metal tines that stick out. That's what I'm calling a bridge. And that bridge is tethered between 2 little wires, so it can bop around. It can move around freely. It's practically floating just on the strings. If those tethers weren't there to sort of maintain it, it would slide a little further back. But for the most part, it's just suspended by the tension there, which plays havoc on tuning the thing, but is really exciting for how it's activated. Any sound that's made comes from the transducer vibrating either the strings or the surface of the bridge and broadcast out. That steel sort of round or half round shape also acts as an amplifier. So as that surface transducer moves, unlike a voice coil, it's not physically moving in and out. It's actually like expanding and contracting. So as it expands and contracts, it does the same thing to the surface that it's on. And that's enough of a movement to sort of begin to push sound waves through it. It's a pretty dynamic thing. And those are the things that are in the gallery when you go in to see it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some older work that I was dabbling with when I was pretty young. Some of this goes all the way back to undergraduate work. And I was kind of thinking about instruments and sound making, and a lot of it was just visual portmanteaus or like a willful twist of intentionality that was usually driven by some sort of personal narrative. An upright musical saw, a little concertina shell that you place a harmonica in. It was titled Harmonica for the Breathless. A replica of my great-grandfather's violin in plywood. Thank you, Leonard Cohen. Or a piano with its soundboard removed and an acrylic aquarium replaced with it to play music for water plants or pond life. So that whole piano was gutted and the soundboard was suspended inside of an aquarium tank that I fabricated and filled up with water, and realized that it was not built stout enough, and slowly cracked and gushed water into that delightful pool below it. Other ways I've considered musicality is the instruments themselves, and considering how a piece of wood becomes a violin, and that sort of transformation always always stupefies me of like, be it a tree becoming a violin, or like a chunk of ore coming out of the ground and becoming a trumpet or a trombone. It's this amazing connection to this world we live in that is not like tethered in any way outside of this like experience with those materials, knowing that these things can become uh, a vessel for expression, can become something that is so that enables people to do such amazing moving things. So the piece on the left, there's a spruce tree in it. The piece is called Duet. It's watered and agitated by somebody playing the keyboard in the center, knowing one day that that tree will be cut down and turned into a violin and be harvested. I learned the violin in a Suzuki method as a child, and so I always pictured those Suzuki books sitting on top of the little keyboard, but then you wouldn't see all that beautiful detail of the valves opening and closing as you play through the notes. The piece on the right is really similar. It's a false tree. It's a version of a bald cypress, which I grew up around a lot of. It's played or bowed by a ruckus contraption, but occasionally makes this really nice drone. It goes through a diaphragm. That tree goes to like one central point into a diaphragm that shakes back and forth as if it were a Victrola or a gramophone through that sort of curly horn shape, and makes this occasional nice noise. It's faint when it gets there, but it's this nice drony kind of groan. This piece had a lot to do with the distance I was feeling and feeling removed from the place where I grew up and the people that I miss there. Other work that tends to follow this path are kinetic objects that have some semblance of purpose. Some of this, which was a plate spinning machine, was less about actually making the plate spin and more about the hope that you have that moment before it's actually engaged, where everything's like poised and about ready to either magically work or, as it often did, come crashing down. Some of the plates would stay up there and would actually bore themselves through it. They're ram molded ceramic plates that I made and fired. So they made really wonderful sounds when they fell. And then I wanted to end that sort of trip down memory lane with these two pieces. One being one of my most recent ones on the right, and one on the left was a like embarrassingly old. The one on the left is a grill installation of a steel and aluminum cone. It was tied to some branches. So again, there's a little diaphragm towards the end of the cone with a bunch of piano wires that were stretched out taut to the branches of the tree. And it was a pretty windy night. So as the tree would move around, those strings would sort of get struck cacophonously and amplify that sound to whoever was listening. And for whatever reason, that piece just kind of sat fallow. I just sort of did it and like shelved it as like, haha, got it. And didn't investigate it further. And I don't really know why I checked out on it. It seems like there was more possibilities there than I let it have. And then this most recent, or a recent piece, this 2018, so not super recent. It was at the Headroom Gallery called Perpetual Present. It was delightful to make. It was raised out of 3 pieces of copper that were seamed together, and really enjoyable for me to really consider this prompt for the show, which was gravity jokes, which was jokes about gravity and jokes with gravity, and trying to parse some sort of understanding of quantum gravity through representing it as a 3-dimensional form, a hollow shape that freezes something so dynamic as the quanta of what holds together our galaxy, our reality. Was really an enjoyable thing. It was just hours of me like tapping on this thing with a hammer. And it made me really excited just about formal sculpture, about just formal objects, and considering them in a way that I haven't ever really given them the credence that I should have. I was always looking for some sort of narrative value, something to like give me a reason to be doing something as opposed to enjoying that moment of creation, that act of like finding, finding form. And really I could exist in like every centimeter of that piece with like these little hammered marks and this surface and texture coming out. So that's where I was mentally with my previous work. About this time, I found this musician. It was actually kind of literally this musician was thrown at me by my aunt right as I was about ready to take a car trip with my family. And we even joked about it, like my wife saying, there's no way we're listening to this on the road, this Japanese ambient and environmental music and new age music. That's not what we're going to be spending our time with. But Hiroshi Yoshimura, the artist in the top left, really did something to me. He's a Brian Eno head and has a sort of care for space that I cherish. It was revelatory for me to hear this song on this what would it be, like a sampler album. So I looked him up more. It's delightful and similar to what I was enjoying about the surface of these raised vessels and forms, and really took me places. So I'll try and share some of that now. So I had this feeling of moving on a walkway or being on a moving walkway, but the music just carried me through time. It's really dynamic for me. So with these things rattling around in my head, I put together the proposal for what became this show, trying to consider sound as an element of sculpture. What does a Isamu Noguchi work rumble like all day? What's that internal tone that it's sitting there with contemplatively? Let's see if I can actually get out of this now. There we go. Coupled with that an eccentric electronic instrument called the Owens Martineau, made by Maurice Martineau. There's a near perfect hybrid of electronic and acoustic instruments. Part of my shock about my enjoyment of this Hiroshi Yoshimura work was that it was electronic. And most times when I'm enjoying electronic music, it's like, oh, it's kind of atonal, it's making me move in a nice way, but it's not something that like has ever really evoked the same emotional response or sort of transcendence that other music has. And this instrument's really fascinating because it's an electronic instrument that's like made specifically to try and bring about expressiveness. There's a little pad that is rumored to be made with gunpowder that you can sort of push on and increase tone and sort of be able to like bend notes and play vibrato. There's a string, if you know Radiohead, you've probably seen Johnny Greenwood play one of these. And it's a really curious thing that's sort of not only playing around with electronic sounds and trying to figure out a new way to create music. There were also these filters or speakers that were with it. So you could like directly send the sound through the palm diffuser, which on the image to the right is in the background, which was obviously what I kind of ripped off for how the sounds are made in the harp piece. And these tangible filters were really fascinating. They seem like such an obvious way to sort of synthesize sound in a really like farm way. Like oh, we'll just make it work by sending it through this thing with strings on it, or speakers that spin in a circle, or this gong that we're gonna set music to. They're fascinating. They're so specific and feel so separate from anything I've seen. Turns out, Noguchi had some sculptures that had the potential to make sound. These two works were made of senukite, a stone that is shockingly sonorous. For some reason, I added so many S's in that sentence. And the piece is styled suspended, not suspended. You could read his writing about this work. There's that one, and then this one, Heart of Darkness. And as a side note about Noguchi and thinking about process, contemplating these things, I'm really envious of how he works with those materials. I mean, he's working with something that starts off with such natural care and baked in beauty. It's essentially, he essentially gets to find out how to bring out what is already there and call attention to it and run with it and try not to ruin it. It's almost a game of like, how do you touch this thing that has so much potential in a way that doesn't spoil it? And that's like mind-blowing way to think about how somebody makes work. It's so different from how I do it until these pieces where I'm making something that needs to be realized by other people, where I'm not in any position and have no desire to be like a Harry Partch or an Adolphe Sax who created the saxophone, or Harry Partch who made these incredible percussion like sound sculptures that he performed with. And me trying to figure out what these things are seems much less exciting than working with musicians and working with composers and whoever else to try and draw out what these things have the potential to be. For funsies, here is Stomu Yamashita playing Senukite lithophones, which is what those Noguchi pieces were made out of. I'll try and guess. There. It's really low, so put on your good ears. Those are just stones. Just stones. It's amazing. So here's a bit of in practice or in progress shots. I started off with making a steam tube so that I could steam bend these pieces of wood. On the right is the form with a thin strip of the red elm bent around it. All of the pieces start off about 5/16 to a 1/4 of an inch thick and about 9 feet long. And then there they are drying on the racks. I'm out of order on my slide sheets. Then all these ribs, Then all these ribs, as I paired them up and fit them to one another. So all this time I was working in my basement, working at work, and chewing on these ideas of like sounds and ambience and space, trying to embody these sculptures while working. And during this time I had a son. My son was born, and we were collectively going through a pandemic. So having this really labor-intensive process that I couldn't really stray from once I set it in motion, it was actually really, I think, good for me to have this thing to be able to just like, okay, take the piece out, bend it, dry it, shape it, stick it together, glue it in a very ridiculous way. I had to invent a way to get these things to stick together. And also at this time I started using hide glue, which as a vegetarian I had to like spend a good long time like convincing myself it was a good idea and making sure that it was actually a good idea. And it's pretty exceptional. It's actually really amazing stuff. Once I got past that it was rendered from animals. Some more fitting, some more. There's actually where I'm speaking to you from right now. And then there's the first coat of linseed oil on the frame itself. I watched a lot of videos and read a lot of books about how bazookies are made, as well as lutes. They use a very similar process. Usually it's just a sort of like a lozenge shape or a peel shape that's placed together on a wooden buck. And then every seam ends up getting taped. It's a little bit, they're usually making their pieces a little bit thinner than I did. I was concerned that I would just tear this thing to splinters as soon as I strung it up. So I made it a little bit thicker and tried to hedge my bets with a fabric tape on each seam. And then those are the soundboards that I was working on, racing them with my delightfully low ceiling, trying to take advantage of that. And you can see on the right of my workbench, there's a bunch of sandpaper glued to a chunk of aluminum. And that's pretty much how I was flattening these things, trying to get them to line up, was just hand playing and rubbing them back and forth on something flat until they did what I wanted them to do. But I didn't just have that one piece to work on. I was working on this other pieces as well. And I've been making these brush forms out of TIG welded stainless wire and torch welded steel wire to make these little branching objects ever since the birth of my first kid, Sybil. And it was kind of working through growth. It was working through some way to wrap my head around another person growing and sort of experiencing that and trying to, I guess, have a meditative state where I can think about that happening for this person and for me as well, while in a way that I could like digest. And a lot of those things were built out of scraps I had from my previous job. And so when I saw these works by Harry Bertoya, I felt like I had a kindred spirit. It's also kind of a gut punch to find someone doing what you're into much more successfully than you are 30 years ago. But getting over that, they're too delightful to hold grudges. Oh, they're so nice. Just that like negative space inside that weird dandelion thing. And that dandelion thing is gigantic. These bushes are like all welded with an oxyacetylene torch. It's so fun. Look at that thing. It's great. There on the right, he's like putting it together. It's all tubing. It just looks so enjoyable to like witness and be a part of and build at the same time. Like I want to be doing that like every day. And actually that piece was just found recently. It was in a fountain in Philadelphia, and it got removed when they were tearing a building down, and then it just like sat in a barn for like a long time. And turns out that Harry Bertoya also has all of these sun ambient works that I, until recently, didn't really know about. Knew that they sort of existed, had seen some images, but didn't really know much about them. And then as I was researching those other pieces based on, you know, my like, hey, look at that guy doing amazing stuff. He's got a whole barn full of these works. There's been a bit of a resurgence of interest in him as of recently. And that sun ambient album for the sculptures is trying to get a reissue, which is very exciting. It also like comes from a place of deep listening, which is a term that Pauline Olivieros coined and made an album about, which is like a type of radical attentiveness, which I think is really fascinating and really worthwhile right now, particularly. It's definitely a thing I get joy from. And here's just some of those pieces. And pretty much that like that little wiggle is, yeah, that's everything. That's so nice, coupled with that sound. Good job, Harry Bertoya. And then these were parts that I was working on that didn't make it in. These other things that I was trying to like wrap my head around that have yet to actually make it somewhere while I was working on it. Some of that was kind of out of a little bit of a sense of panic that having just that harp and just that sheet would sort of feel too, I don't know, antagonistic, too much of a call and response. I don't know. I felt like they needed something else that where there could be more interplay, more chances of trying to find some sort of language in these objects that informs somebody activating them. And speaking of which, Greg Sinibaldi came by yesterday and performed an improvisation with the works. I'll play a little bit of that. It looks like I'm running a little bit longer than, I'm doing okay. Greg's playing an electronic wind instrument that is essentially a synthesizer based on a woodwind. So you can blow into it and get a similar response to a reed, and you still have some haptic controls with how you move your fingers or slide across them, as well as a series of computer programs he's written to play with them. And there he's affecting the sculptures. That a little bit. Somewhere right about here. so that's that. Thank you, Greg. That was so exciting to see. I got to see it a little bit earlier today and was so excited. It was very, very cool. After this run, Nat Evans, who composed or improvised with some of his work for the opening, he's been working on a composition for this piece at the, let me make sure I get this right, the chapel at the Good Shepherd Center for Neil Welch's album release on November 11th. So get to see the sculpture playing out somewhere else out in the world. So thank you all for coming. I greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions, let's hear them.
That was awesome. I want to pipe in really quick about the 11th. So Neil Welch's album is actually produced through the artist support program at Jack Straw a few years ago, and we're very excited to see that release. So it's a really cool meeting of the Jack Straw minds. It's going to be a terrific event. I did see a hand go up, so I'll mute myself, but fire away, people. Anyone? Well, personally, I'm just, as somebody who went to art school for sculpture and was kind of not good at a whole bunch of different stuff, and I feel like I have a similar sensibility to like a lot of your aesthetic just really resonates with me, but I could never do it as well as you do. So I just would like to say I really admire like both your concepts and your craft and how much attention to detail you put in. I think it's really wonderful. I need to spend more time in the gallery myself next time I'm at Jack Straw, not working in my basement. So thank you for bringing that to the gallery. And if there are any musicians, I should say too, like we'd love to have more people play around with this. I know I mentioned it to a couple of our resident artists who might be up for it. So feel free to drop us a line.
Yeah. So I guess Ruth's got their hand up.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hey, Ruth.
Amazing. Thank you. I guess I have multiple questions, but the one that's sticking with me is like, at what point, and I think you mentioned it, but like, at what point along the journey of like creating this work and installing, did it come into your mind to have it be sort of like a collaboration and invitation with musicians? Because it like you were performing yourself with some of your pieces, like as some of your pieces in the past, but like, I guess when did that come into your head and how?
I think that was kind of part of it from the get-go. Was like I wanted to make something that I didn't know what it would do. I wanted to make something that I didn't know, and I still don't know. I don't know how to make those things work. And so making something that I could bring the stuff that I do know how to do was kind of where I wanted to start and try and figure out how to make something that has the potential that I can like sort of dream about. Like I can, daydream about ways in which this thing could possibly work without like actually knowing is exciting to me. It's a fun way to problem solve. It's a fun way to work myself into a really exciting problem that I have to work my way out of. And relying on other people is really great to answer that.
Thank you.
Awesome. Doug, I see your hands up. Oh, Doug.
Hey, Andy.
Hey, Doug.
I love this thing so much. It was so cool to be there. I guess I have kind of the opposite question of Ruth's. And I think it came to me when you were showing us all the extensive sort of process shots of doing this thing, which was like meticulous and like to a guy like me, pretty laborious. But I'm just kind of curious, like if now that it exists, if there's any kind of like specific composition, like composer composition, like to hand it. It's lovely that people can engage with it, spontaneously. But I'm wondering, like, what is the virtuosic sort of like composition for this arrangement of sound making things, if that's worth thinking about. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, totally. I I honestly have no idea. And what's exciting about that is being able to find people like Greg and like Nat to experiment with them and figure out what works and what doesn't. And also, you know, in thinking about those things as sculptures, seeing if there is an interplay between what those objects are and what is created through them, um, seems really rich to me. So I have one thing set in my mind. I mean, I was thinking, I was just thinking about like how I would approach it if I were composing, thinking about like looking at the shape, looking, how my eye moves over it, how it feels a particular way, or how it sort of feels so weighted. I mean, originally that piece, the harp piece, was going to be um, anchored into a rock and like sort of like bent over, or even like just that one sort of bulbous part, the wooden part, had like an accessory that sort of came off and sort of like the whole thing was sort of bent over like a teeter totter. So it was a little more whimsical or something. And it just didn't feel practical to move a giant rock around. But I think that all of those choices really would inform how that perfect composition comes about. And I think that's really fascinating.
You had a question in the chat about what exactly you studied in college.
Yeah, I sculpture. Yeah, so I did sculpture at the Heron School of Art in Indianapolis, Indiana, through IUPUI, and had a minor in printmaking, and nearly minor. I didn't get the last class, almost. And then I did my graduate work at the University of Washington, back when it was sculpture and public art, not the 3D 4M amalgamation it is today. Nancy?
Hi. I just have kind of a fun question. It was fun seeing you play the videos and seeing you react to it, of how like sound sounded to you. So I'm just wondering, what kind of music do you listen to when you're working on your projects?
I'm kind of all over the place with a lot of it. Mostly I've been listening to books and podcasts. When on certain pieces, when there's like deadlines and then there's like, something that has to happen, I'll find myself playing the same albums over and over again. That some pieces that were like, I had to like get over stuff to like keep making, would be a lot of like really heavy stuff, from like High on Fire to Sun O, to these really deep, yeah, exactly, yeah, hands in the air, just to like keep me activated and engaged with it. Other things, I'm kind of all over the board. I mean, sometimes it's like really dancey stuff, sometimes it's really like whatever. It's that that Music for 9 Postcards, or Music for 9 Postcards by Hiroshi Yoshimura is really dreamy and wonderful, and I listened to it a lot while I was making these pieces, as well as Green, the other album that Hiroshi Yoshimura has.
I would like to, if it's okay, I want to say that we're going to put up that whole Cinebaldi video on YouTube as soon as I can. So next week, because I want to see and hear that whole thing. So
yeah,
look out. And our YouTube, the Jack Straw Cultural Center on YouTube, is a good place to find all kinds of things like this. And there's a gallery tours and stuff like that. Do you see Rowan's question? Hi.
Ooh.
High on Fire and Sun, high five. 100%. How long did it all take to come up with, plan, and realize? That's a good question. I mean, you applied for this program almost exactly 2 years ago, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
Or 1 year? 2 years ago, yeah.
2 years.
And you already had the concept, at least.
Yeah, I kind of had I had kind of like an inkling of it. I had one other proposal out where I was sort of wanting to construct kind of an instrument that I wanted to try and figure out I wanted to give myself the prompt of making something that felt like it sounded like the earth churning, like they'll like figure out what geologic sounds would actually be, or some way to like make something that felt like that. but that was about it. Other than that, when I set up this proposal, it was pretty loose on what I wanted to do and more broad strokes about just generalizations of what I wanted to see and what I wanted to try and explore through the residency. Because knowing with the residency, you get time in the studio and you've got the resources there, which are incredible. Like to be able to like think about sound stuff and be able to say, hey, is this possible? To an engineer that knows what they're doing is pretty exceptional. And then yeah, having this great year of quarantine and was enough time to actually get some of these things done that I probably would have been under an intense amount of stress had it not been this 2-year hiatus of quarantining and COVID-ness.
Well, it's clear you made very good use of your time.
Can I be selfish and ask another question?
Totally.
So in all of your works, I guess, not even just specific to this, like, how do you see yourself grappling with the intersection, if you will? I don't even know how I feel about this question, by the way, before I phrase it. The intersection of like the art being visual itself in nature, like a sculpture, and like its function as a tool, but like, do you also see that intersection being the art itself? I guess, how do you see it? Because you deal with it in a really interesting and enjoyable way.
Thank you. That's what I hope to get to, is trying to like question, that utility of art. Like there is definite utility. There's definite like purpose and like, I have a great immense care for it and understand and care about the history of it and where it's coming from and sort of all these things that are sort of layered on top of it. And it's hard to sometimes figure out how to bring that across or like view it. And so part of my thinking is like, how do I make this more accessible? Sometimes it's like trying to make something kind of comedic or kind of silly that still has some sort of weight to it, something that can draw you in and still give you like enough of a that you've got something after that quasi functionality or accessibility is gone, that lives with it like a tool. Because I think that's how I think about things. I mean, I could probably have a story or some bit of information about every single tool that I have in my shop, every single instrument that I have like under my bed. I have like very intimate care and stories about, and a lot of it's tied up with my family. It's tied up with people that I love and care about. And I think trying to bring that to objects is hard. And especially objects that you offer to other people is like, hey, what do you think about this? That's what I hope to do.
Thank you. It was great.
Thank you, Stephanie, for that Sounds of Planets video. Very fun.
Yeah, thank you, Andy, for your talk. I'm glad I got to get to know you a little bit better with what your interests are, and I totally am on board with the sounds and stuff. So sorry, my family in the background.
I totally understand. So I'm hiding in the basement.
Well, from my basement to yours, thank you everybody for being here. Does anybody have any last thoughts or questions? Yeah, Andy alluded to, so we'll be recording an interview next week, which we will produce into a podcast, which takes a while. So we'll be getting it out there onto our podcast feed in the coming weeks and months. But yeah, do call or email to schedule a visit. We would love to have you come check these works out and check out the show at the chapel on November 11th. It's going to be terrific. Any last thoughts from you, Andy?
No, just thanks everybody for coming out. It's I know it's hard to put up with more TVs and more screens after a day of dealing with screens. So I really appreciate the effort. I think it's fantastic.
Yes, I echo that resoundingly. Thank you all for coming. and have a great rest of your evening. Take care.
Thank you all.
you.